times if you ever look at my lips during this song and it doesn't look like it's right, I'm just in a different place, okay? That's all it is. Ordinary. Ordinary doesn't necessarily work for us. If you're not extraordinary, well, then what are you, right? You're just ordinary. But ordinary has a context. I'm just an ordinary millionaire. I'm not an extraordinary one, I'm just an ordinary one. Okay, that's not true. But hopefully you got the point, ordinary depends on ordinary what? An ordinary millionaire, not so bad. An ordinary child of God. Well, that's something. I want to read a verse here. It's in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. And then we'll get started. Paul was writing to the church in Corinth that, they kind of had some issues with him, and he's kind of getting some of these things worked out. I just realized I don't even need that because I don't have slides today. And he writes this, he says, "For we do not preach ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. For God, who said, 'Let light shine out of the darkness,' made his light shine in our hearts, to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ." But then he says, "But we have this treasure." The knowledge, let me just back up the phrase. He gave us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God. And we have this treasure, verse 7, in jars of clay, to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from ourselves. So we're just ordinary children of God. I'll take it. We live in a culture that's preoccupied with personality, occupied with celebrity. To the point there seems like there's one set of justice for the ordinary people and another set of justice. Other rules for celebrities, I don't know. But in contrast, what's interesting, the Bible reveals time and again how God uses unremarkable people. Ordinary people. Unremarkable people at unlikely times to accomplish his purposes. And so, going back to Paul's language, like the jars of clay, we ordinary men are chosen by God to show that all the power and all the glory belongs to God alone. I have to tell you, several people were speaking today, and I'm sitting here, and my preacher mind works in preacher's ways, and I'm sitting here saying, man, that could be a sermon right there. I'm processing whatever I'm going to say, kind of some of the things that Jason said, some of the things that Tony said, and I'm just thinking, man, I could preach about that right now. Ordinary. We don't give much thought about it. We don't really appreciate anything ordinary. When we read the Bible, we construct tiers. We have our A-listers in the New Testament. So these are the important people, and it's Peter, Paul, John, and James. These are the big personalities. And then we have maybe a second tier, and maybe that's Matthew who walked with the Lord and who wrote the Gospel of Matthew. And then there's Luke, who was a missionary and historian, and he wrote the book of the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts. And we might add a third maybe that was Stephen, the first martyr. He doesn't get to be on the second tier because he wasn't around very long. He didn't have time to do a whole lot. Okay? Maybe there's Nicodemus on the third tier. Maybe Barnabas on the third tier. Maybe Barnabas on the second tier. I don't know if you like if you like Barnabas, he might be on the first tier for you. Barnabas, the son of encouragement. Barnabas, who basically sponsored Paul and brought him in and gave him introduction, and if you would, empowered and released his ministry that changed the face of Christianity. So maybe Barnabas is on the first, maybe the second. I'm not sure. I put him on the third. You see, we can't help but divide these personalities into tiers because that's the way we think. It's us imposing our value system on the spiritual realm. So maybe we add to that third tier names like Timothy and Silas and Epaphras and Onesimus, Lydia, along with Aquila and Priscilla and Titus and John Mark, just to name a few. But then you have the tierless people. All right, T-I-E-R, less people. They didn't make the cut. They're not on any, they're not on the third shelf, second shelf, and they're certainly not on the first shelf. Okay, they're not personalities. They're not the main players. So you have the tierless people, and these are the ones who were fighting the good fight, and who were never part of a missionary team or a companion of one of the top tier personalities like Paul or Peter or some of the other guys. Maybe they were just local people who obeyed the gospel, and when Paul and his team moved on, they remained there and they took up the torch. And these folks are nameless and faceless from our perspective, but here's the deal. But these ordinary people carried the water for God. Paul has moved on. Maybe he'll send back Titus if we have problems. Or maybe he'll send back Timothy to set some things in order. Who knows? But normally we're going to get that visit when we kind of, have stepped on it, and now we got a big mess here and we don't know how to fix it. But in the meanwhile, these people are carrying the water for God. And they're beloved. I want you to know that there are people like that right here in this congregation. People who carry the Lord's water without even ever being noticed or celebrated. And they do that without a second thought. Their crowns, I think, will shine brighter because they did what they did unheralded and unnoticed, except by Him who notices and sees it all. And these are the people that Jesus described in Matthew 25. I love that particular verse. And he says that these people, they clothed the naked, they visited the sick, they restored the hope, they served in anonymity. And I love the people, when they asked Jesus, right? Jesus says, enter into the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. And I said, now wait a minute. Now when did we see you hungry and feed you? Or when did we see you naked and clothe you? Or sick and tended to you? Or in prison and visited you? And of course you know Jesus' reply. Inasmuch as you did that to one of these little ones, you did it to me. And he answered the question. But the point I want to make here is that they did what they did and thought nothing of it. It is what was needed. It was automatic. It was, okay, are you ready? Ordinary godliness. Just what any believer would do, should do, could do. I mean, it wasn't, in their minds, anything special or different. It wasn't a big deal. It is simply what one does. So there are always those everyday brothers that do the grunt work of the kingdom. Hopefully you understand what that means. The grunt work of the kingdom. And in doing that, as they make the visit, as they call upon the person, as they help someone, whatever it is they do, they demonstrate that none of us are insignificant in God's plans. And while we may not be particularly polished or particularly gifted, God delights in using those who are faithful, obedient, available, and teachable. Just ordinary folks. Today I want to talk about a tearless person. Okay, one of the characters in the Bible that, is just an everyday child of God. Just an everyday disciple. He's a lesser personality. And I address this individual because there's a lot to be learned from someone who is not a rising star, but he is a constant one. FYI, if you didn't get my emphasis there, I'm suggesting that there's a glory in being the constant star as compared to the rising star. And so, he isn't on the Bible's A list. He's not on our top 2 tiers. I want to talk about Ananias. And so let's just take a second and refine my little contrast here. On one side, we have our perspective on how God works and how God is served. And we have our particular affinity toward big personalities, big results, big events, big names. And on the other side, you have God's established practice of using unremarkable people in the most unlikely of circumstances to do His work. Just ordinary people. Now, I pause for a moment and say, now, is that a real contrast? Is that just the preacher making that? Well, the truth is, it is a contrast. And God has a lot to say about ordinary godliness. Listen to 1 Corinthians chapter 1. I'll be reading verse 26 through 29. Brothers and sisters, think about what you were when you were called. I've read this verse before, some of you recognize it. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were influential. Not many were of noble birth. Ordinary guys. But God chose. There's the phrase. But God chose the foolish things of this world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of the world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one will boast before Him. You see, God chose to use ordinary people to prove His point. That it was never about us in the beginning. In the first place, it was never about us. So here is the principle that we observe in God time and time again. God chooses to use the ordinary to confuse, disarm, frustrate our worldly value system that celebrates celebrity and power and wealth and prestige. And the funny thing is, and yet we can't help ourselves. So even in the kingdom, we're constantly trying to become someone. We're constantly trying to become someone, not realizing how in that process, we become less useful to God as we begin to think that the story's about us. That the story is about what we know. About us and our abilities rather than the glory and the goodness of God who calls us out of our weakness to accomplish great things to His glory. You see, there's a place for the ordinary. I don't have to be gifted. I don't have to be eloquent. Good thing, too. And here's the deal. Ananias fits that mold. As we turn to Acts chapter 9, you'll remember how God struck Saul blind on the way to Antioch, where he intended to arrest believers and do further damage to the way. And God tells Saul to go to Antioch and wait. And that gets us to Ananias. Because God appears in a vision to Ananias. And he sends Ananias to go to Paul and cure his blindness and tell him what God has ordained for his life. And so we pick up the story in verse 10. Here's what the New King James Version says. Now there was a certain disciple at Damascus. I think I said Antioch earlier. Sorry, Damascus. Ordinary people mess up. Anyhow, so he's on his way to Damascus. And there is in Damascus a certain disciple named Ananias. And to him the Lord said in a vision, Ananias. And he said, Here I am, Lord. So the Lord said to him, Arise and go to the street called Straight, and inquire at the house of Judas for one called Saul of Tarsus, for behold, he is praying. And in a vision he has seen a man named Ananias coming in and putting his hands on him so that he might receive his sight. Then Ananias answered, Lord, now I've heard a lot of things about this guy. Okay. He said, All right, Lord, I've heard many things about this man, how much harm he has done to your saints in Jerusalem, and he has authority from the chief priest to bind all who call on your name. But the Lord said to him, Go, for he is a chosen vessel of mine, to bear my name before Gentiles, kings, and the children of Israel, for I will show him how many things he must suffer for my name's sake. And Ananias went his way and entered the house, and laying his hands on him, said, Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road as you came, has sent me that you may receive your sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit. Immediately there fell from his eyes something like scales, and he received his sight at once, and he arose and was baptized. We're all familiar with the story, but I want to consider it from the perspective of ordinary godliness, if you would. And I like how the King James starts the story. Okay? I like the fact that he starts with, and in Damascus there was a certain disciple. A certain disciple named Ananias. And I have to observe, wow, is that a bit underwhelming or what? He didn't say, he didn't introduce him, and now in Damascus there was this renowned disciple, this famous disciple, this popular disciple. He didn't say that in Damascus there was a man named Ananias the deacon, Ananias the elder, Ananias the evangelist. He was just a certain disciple. As if any disciple would do. And by the way, that's the point of my sermon. Any disciple will do. Any disciple will do when it comes to God and His purposes. So Ananias was chosen because he was a disciple. And that was enough. The text then states that God called him through a vision. And sometimes we get all wobbly here, right? Vision. When the truth is that God could have called Ananias in any number of ways. The point of the story at this point is not how he was called, but that Ananias, this certain disciple, was open to God when he called. He was waiting on God to be called. He was waiting on the Lord. He was available and willing. And so, yes, he would rearrange his schedule. And he would reorder his priorities to fulfill whatever God commanded. And I just want to take a moment and say, Wow, in today's world, that's novel. In today's world, that's a hard thing to come across. I mean, think about it. In our busy world, our schedule, our agenda, our priorities are almost sacred. Don't mess with my agenda. Don't mess with my priorities. Don't mess with my schedule. Lord, what do you mean interrupting my agenda to take care of some person in need? What do you mean to slow my roll and listen and empathize with the downtrodden and heartbroken? I've got stuff to do. I have a list of responsibilities. And after I do everything that my job requires and my family requires and Honey requires and that Uncle Sam requires, after I do all that stuff, I still have some of my own stuff that I have to fit in there somehow, some way. So just keep your hands off the schedule. And by the way, I'm being a lot more honest up here speaking up front than sometimes we are with ourselves, because we go through that process in about 2.2 seconds and go on about our day. Because we're not willing to change our schedule to accommodate the needs of others or the work of the kingdom at times. Maybe that sounds familiar. Have you ever wondered why you can't hear the call of God when others apparently do, or why you can't connect to the mission when others seem to connect so readily? Well, are you open to it? Ananias was. When God needed something done, Ananias was there, was, Lord, here I am. Lord, here I am. Have you ever thought about starting your day with, Lord, here I am? Whatever that involves, whatever is needed, I'm your man. You see, Ananias did that. He was just an ordinary guy who was willing and available to be used. Hey, you know what's cool? Imagine a congregation full of those kind of people. Lord, here I am. Whatever you need, however long it takes, whatever is involved, I will adapt my agenda. I'll change my schedule. I'll move my priorities, because there is nothing in my life more important than what you would have me to do today. Imagine a congregation of people filled with that spirit. And here's the point. That's just ordinary godliness. Because to tell you the truth, nothing was more important or more pressing than the Lord's will on that day, or in our day, and nothing is more important or more pressing than the opportunity to serve God. Another thing that kind of impresses me about this story and resonates with me is Ananias did not seize the moment to elevate himself. And so first we get this really underwhelming introduction. There was a certain disciple named Ananias. Could have been any other disciple, by the way, because disciples are at the Lord's beck and call. So there was this ordinary disciple, and the point is he doesn't seize the moment to elevate himself. He doesn't inject himself into the narrative or seize the limelight or act like he's something other than the servant that he is. He doesn't have to go from ordinary to extraordinary to be useful and to serve God and to promote the kingdom of God in his day. He is comfortable serving God in the capacity that God intended. And I want you to know that's pretty refreshing and genuine. I'm just going to do what God told me to do. I'm going to serve in whatever way God wants me to serve, even if I do it unheralded, because I know God sees and God knows. He knows his place, and he serves God from there. Just kind of put that in your pipe and smoke it. He knows his place, and he serves God from there, content to do so. I'm not necessarily looking to move up. I'm not looking for the corner office down at the church to do the will of God. And that's ordinary godliness and something to be treasured. So let me offer this conclusion today. The moral of the story, if you would. We have a passion for the big moment, the big name, the big event, and whatever prestige we can attach to ourselves. And yet from Ananias we can learn this. Big is when we move in God's direction, under God's direction. All right, did you get that one? I might have surprised you on that one. Okay. Big is when we move in God's direction, under God's direction. Number one. Number two. Big is when we are open to his call and make ourselves available without making ourselves the story. And so I am totally comfortable serving God from my place in realizing that may be what I am called to do. That may be all that I'm called to do. So I'm going to serve God from my place. I'm comfortable with serving God in the capacity that God intended. Number three. Big is when we do that and think nothing of it because obedience is assumed regardless of the circumstance. Because, look, that is my life. Being available to God, being used by God, however long it takes, however insignificant in my eyes or someone else's eyes that task may be, that is my life and longing. And there is nothing that substitutes for it. And lastly, big is when we readily yield to God's sovereignty. Lord, now I've heard about this Saul guy. Go your way. For he is a chosen vessel. Well, Lord, I've heard about those brothers over at so-and-so congregation. Or, Lord, I've heard about, the trouble that people get into when they take a stand for you. Lord, I've heard about that. Big is when we readily yield to God's sovereignty, taking God at his word at all times. Several sermons just popped into my mind. I want to send you home today committed to that kind of ordinary godliness. I'm just an ordinary child of God. I don't have to be gifted or acclaimed. I don't have to be promoted. I am content to serve God in whatever capacity he deems appropriate for me. I'm not trying to seize the moment to promote myself. I want to promote Christ in him crucified. So I want to send you home today committed to that kind of ordinary godliness. I don't have to be someone. I don't have to be the top tier. I don't have to be the focus of the story. I just need to fulfill the role that God has for me. Ordinary godliness. Or the godliness of the ordinary. I love the saying that at church, you'd be surprised at what could be accomplished if no one cared who got the credit. There is a blessing, there is a power in simply being an ordinary child of God. This morning, I want you to know how richly blessed you are. I could say, I am the child, and I could throw in there some name of a famous person, politician, powerful general, diplomat, whoever, and I would not begin to touch the hem of the garment. But what reality is ours, when we can affirm in total confidence that we are children of God. Now to take that and to live it and to be used by God and to adapt our schedule, whatever it is, however pressing it is,